Hello, everyone. This is Kathy Arzad, your managing broker in Florida. So I wanted to get this workshop out to you. This will be recorded. Of course, anyone who pops in during this program can definitely ask questions in person, of course. But we are going to get started, and you can view this later on YouTube. So I just wanted to kind of go over the NAR settlement key points again. I'm just going to increase my screen size a little bit. Oh, perfect. Okay. Uh, okay, so the settlement goals, of course, were to secure liability release for all of its members, associations, and MLSs. So that was the goal, and to preserve consumer choices, right, regarding real estate services and compensation. That was all the goals. The terms, liability release for NAR, compensation offers moved off the MLS platforms, of course, which is all happening this week. Written agreements required for MLS participants working with buyers. We're going to go over those today. The $418 million settlement payment is approximately over 4 years paid out by NAR, and NAR denies any wrongdoing. Now, changes to compensation policy prohibits offers of compensation on MLS platforms. Compensation can still be negotiated off the MLS, of course. Sellers can offer buyer concessions on the MLS. So that's part of this policy. And most of the MLSs in Florida have already added those concession fields. The timeline, so the preliminary approval of this was April 24th. Practice changes effective August 17th. That's this Saturday. That's why a lot of the different MLSs have already implemented it as of Monday or Tuesday of this week. Final approval is November 26th, and it's expected to go through, but NAR says the small chance that it does not go through, like final approval, they're still going to implement all of these changes. So that's not going to change what we're talking about today. So the rationale for the settlement: reduce liability, of course, avoid prolonged litigation and uncertainty, provide a path forward for the industry, and then exclusion. So there were some big name brokerages that settled out of this, okay? And that's also like Home Services of America and then some other large brokerages. So they're not included in this release of liability. A key point here, there's going to be no changes in NAR membership dues for this year or next year. So here are Florida releases. Okay, so we had compensation agreements come out June 21st, and on July 9th, exclusive buyer broker agreements. We did talk about compensation agreements. I did like a couple months ago, right after the compensation came out, and I've just recapped it here. So this can be the, the inclusive presentation going forward. So July 23rd, there was a property pre-touring agreement that came out and a modification to exclusive buyer broker agreement / the showing agreement. So that was a modification here. And we're going to go over these documents. Revised showing agreement was also released. On July 30th, we had the exclusive right of sale listing agreements come out and the exclusive brokerage listing agreement. On August 6th, the modification to the listing agreement. This modification, also, we're going over all these, but this modification is for any existing active listings that were signed on the old agreement, and you need to make it compliant. And again, the compensation disclosure statement is the same thing. So if you had already signed a buyer broker agreement prior to that, or a listing agreement prior to that, or you have a pending sale, you're going to need to look at this compensation disclosure statement and present it to your consumers, your clients. Coming soon. So these haven't been released yet, but keep an eye out. There will be an amended retainer agreement, and there is a release of amended listing agreements and several other forms coming out. The condo rider that they spoke of coming out in July is now coming out in October. So keep an eye out for all of these, and we'll continue to have these workshops too when new forms come out. And Kiona, you're welcome to stop me anytime you have a question. The NAR MLS rules. So this is an overview of the MLS rules. Um, Number one, eliminate and prohibit any requirement of offers of compensation in the MLS between listing brokers or sellers to buyer brokers. So obviously the compensation fields, the commission fields, the co-op fields, any of that has been removed from the MLS. Number two, eliminate and prohibit MLS participants and sellers from making any offers of compensation in the MLS. Okay, so you can't put it in the description. You can't put it in the photos. None of it cannot be in the MLS. Require the MLS to eliminate all broker compensation fields and information in the MLS. Number four, require the MLS to not create, facilitate, or support any non-MLS mechanism. So that's an internet aggregator's website, right? So if you have an IDX feed on a website, that's considered an internet aggregator's site potentially, or like Zillow, like something like that. That's where all the IDXs kind of feed into Zillow. That's a no-no. Zillow cannot post it. Number five, prohibit the use of MLS data or data feeds to directly or indirectly establish or maintain a platform of offers. This kind of goes to the same number four. Number six, reinforce that MLS participants and subscribers and MLSs cannot enable the ability to filter out or restrict MLS listings based on the level of compensation. So, number seven, require compensation disclosures to sellers and buyers. Number eight, this is a big one. This is a big change. Require MLS participants working with a buyer to enter into a written agreement with the buyer prior to touring a property. We're going to go over that in a little bit. So I encourage you to just take a screenshot of this because this is just some resources for you. The NAR settlement website, what you need to know, the settlement facts, FAQs. This is the legal hotline number. Absolutely keep that handy. And then suggestions. I mean, not, questions, yes, but questions can come to me too, but suggestions on form changes. You're out there in the field. So if you have an idea, say, gosh, this just doesn't make sense, with the normal workflow, send that to forms@floridarealtors.org because they are looking for that. They're lawyers. They're not out in the field selling. So if you have suggestions, please pass it on. So here are the releases, okay? So these were the new buyer representation forms that were released on June 21st. This is a recap from our last meeting, okay? So the forms that, are now live, all of the new forms are live in Form Simplicity. So these are the compensation agreements, and these are the modification to compensation agreements. So the compensation agreement, seller's broker to buyer's broker, if that's the case, or seller to buyer's broker. So if the seller is unrepresented, then you're going to use this form. And then if you have modifications to either of these, you use these forms. Very simple, very simple. I'm sure you've already figured this out, right? So the seller's broker to buyer's broker, this is, of course, you need to have a specific property. So this can't be just like an umbrella sort of form. The term must be defined, a time period. The compensation must be clearly defined. And then this is key in all these forms. The buyer's broker must be able to prove procuring cause of the sale, meaning they were the reason the buyer is making the offer. So they're not just writing the form, writing a contract. They actually procured the cause. Radius is requiring, this on all purchase checklists. Even if compensation is zero. Okay, so that is something that we are doing, right? Seller's broker to buyer's broker. So even if the seller's broker is not giving anything to the buyer's broker, put compensation as zero. And I'm going to show you that. I don't know can you see that okay? That seems kind of small. For some reason, it's not very, it's like, I don't know why. The screen is not very big today. But anyway, here it is, compensation agreement, seller's broker to buyer's broker, very simple form, very clearly lays out what this includes. Now here, even so, if the seller's broker is not paying the buyer's broker, we would like you to put 0 right here in the compensation fields. Oh yeah, I thought I maybe had, here we go. And it's green. But anyway, in this field, put 0 or 0 or 0, whatever, and have them sign. And the reason we're asking you to do that is because of transparency and getting you used to using these forms. So you'll see in the checklist that we do want you to fill this out, even if the seller's broker isn't compensating the buyer's broker. Oh, I'm new to this. Okay, there we go. I'll get the hang of it. Compensation agreement, seller to buyer's broker. Again, same thing. Defined term, and you must prove procuring cause. So that's if you bring a buyer to like a for sale by owner and they're agreeing to pay you. Here you go, right here. And even if they're not agreeing to pay you, it probably wouldn't be bad to just fill this out just for the sake. So the buyer then would be compensating you, and we'll be talking about that. And these are the modifications. Something that was added to all of the forms for Florida Realtors, commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. In no event will buyers, brokers' compensation exceed the amount of compensation in the written agreement with the buyer. So that means that if you had signed, you had signed a buyer broker agreement with your buyer, before even showing them property, right? And they agreed to give you 3%. And then you've taken them to a new construction, like a builder, excuse me, and the builder is offering like a $500 bonus. You are not able to get that bonus unless you disclose it in writing to the buyer because of this whole transparency thing. Because essentially, then you'd be getting 3% plus $500. So the buyer needs to be aware of that. And the buyer may say, hey, can you credit me back, the $500? Like, it's a point of discussion. So it just keeps you out of hot water. So you have to disclose everything and have everything in writing to the buyer. So this is that modification. If any of these terms change, you fill out the modification. Okay, exclusive buyer broker agreements, revised and simplified to improve their usability and bring them into compliance with the NAR settlement agreement. The buyer is now the consumer. That's a huge change in all of these forms. Excuse me. In bold, under acknowledgement, I just read this, but this is actually different now from what I just read. What I just read was from June 21st. Now they've changed everything from buyer to consumer. Brokerage commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. The broker may not receive compensation from any source that exceeds the amount of rate agreed to with the consumer. They're not even saying there's no commission. The word commission is off of all of this paperwork. It should be off of our repertoire. We should be using the words compensation. Now, consumer, Florida Realtors wants us to call them consumers versus buyers. And this is the form. And I'm sorry, this is so tiny. Let me see if I can, I don't think I can. Okay. You all are able to zoom in if this is too small on your own screen. So that's what this is. Then those are the main changes that I just outlined. But you're going to need to make sure that you have this filled out before you start working with a buyer. Now, we do have some options here. There's more options that have been rolled out, which I'm going to talk about in a second, like a pre-property touring agreement. We're going to talk about that in a second. But this is actually what you're going to want to fill out with a bona fide buyer, consumer client. Okay. Here it is. The property pre-touring agreement. So it must be signed before touring any homes. The consumer does not need to pay the broker at the time of touring. That's written here. At the time of touring. Yeah. Outlines compensation at successful close of escrow. So you do right here what your anticipated compensation is. So you do have to have that conversation with your consumer buyer before touring. Okay, so my fees are 3%, or my fees are 2%, whatever your fees are, and you've outlined exactly what you're going to offer that buyer for that compensation and why it's important to have a buyer representation. So that's why you're going to have this negotiation. Now, when you're going and touring properties, there's no way to say, um, okay, I'm getting 2%. I should find out if the seller's giving at least 2%. There's no way to do that. You're going to have to negotiate up front with your buyer, and then you're going to have to show them property that fits what they're looking for. That's just how it's going to have to be. Now you can ask, of course, but are you really going to do that with all of these homes that they want to see in one? Like, if they're going to see 5 homes on one day, are you really going to spend the time to call all of them? Probably not. So, I mean, you do need to have this cleared up right away. Now, also a nice way to do it, an option is to, say you're comfortable with a 3% compensation. That's what you are planning to get for the skills and the expertise that you're going to be providing to that buyer. So if that's said, put the 3% on here, but you can tell the buyer, look, if the seller is compensating even part of this, that's going to be great, because then you won't have to pay the 3%. However, I want you to be expecting that the 3% is going to be the compensation from you. It's just a bonus if the seller is contributing. You are going to be able to see buyer concessions on the MLS. So the buyer can see that, and they could use that towards whatever their closing costs are. So that's something too. Now, something important here, if you are writing this property pre-touring agreement before touring any properties, and there is, it's outlined as far as your compensation, you will want a buyer broker agreement to be signed when the consumer wishes to write an offer with you. It's more encompassing. It includes more. It's better for both parties, you and the consumer, to get that full one filled out. Okay, so exclusive buyer broker agreement, showing agreement. So this is a brand new form that they pushed out for you. And it's used to modify the exclusive buyer broker agreement. The EBBA or the showing agreement is simply a modification. Important to include the date of signing on this modification, includes protection period. So if they terminate, and they purchase the home that you showed them, a certain amount of time out, then you would be able to receive your compensation. You would have rights to that. Includes cancellation fee to the broker, can be used to terminate the EBBA. So this is the modification to exclusive buyer broker agreement, showing agreement. Anything that's changed, you're going to put it here. Here's the revised showing agreement. So this is revised to bring it into compliance again with the NAR settlement terms. This includes broker obligations, it includes consumer obligations, and then it includes the compensation terms here and retainer, and then the dispute resolution. So this is a showing agreement that can be used instead of a pre-property touring agreement. So they've offered you, basically Florida Realtors has offered you many options for how to work with consumer buyers. I'm saying consumer buyers just so you understand it's buyers, but consumers. So if you are in a situation and you need to you'll know which specific one you want to use, right? So the pre-property touring agreement is the super short one. The showing agreement is like the medium range one. The buyer broker agreement is the Cadillac, right? That's the the proper full, that's the full long form. So you will know when to use each one, right? And you may not even want to be using the pre-property touring agreement. You may not. That might not fit into your business model. So do you just have to decide? The exclusive right of sale listing agreements. So the majority of change here is in section 9, and I'm going to dive into that in the next slide because it's a lot that was removed and added. Okay, so basically from cooperation with and compensation to other brokers is now the notice to seller regarding buyer brokers. Okay, so we have to make sure they understand all of the changes and the nuances. And then there's a new section, compensation to buyer brokers. Okay, right here. So notice to seller regarding buyer brokers. The buyer's broker, even if compensated by seller or broker, will provide services for the buyer. Seller is advised and is aware that the seller may, but is not required to, compensate a buyer's broker upon closing. Seller may choose to enter into a separate written agreement to pay buyer's broker or may approve broker to pay the buyer's broker in accordance with paragraph 10, which is right down here. Seller also understands the buyer broker may include this broker if the broker also works with the buyer on this transaction. If this occurs during the duration of the listing, broker will be entitled to the compensation in paragraph 8 for services performed for the seller, as well as the buyer's broker compensation in paragraph 10A for services performed for the buyer. The seller should therefore take this into consideration when negotiating compensation, and broker may receive separate compensation from the buyer for services rendered to buyer by the broker. Now, number 10, the compensation to buyer brokers. Brokerage commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. The seller approves the following. So here's where they would approve it. The seller authorizes broker to offer compensation to buyer's broker in the amount of X% of the purchase price, or here's a flat fee. B, the seller authorizes broker to offer compensation to the buyer's broker from the seller in the amount of. So here it is. Either it's being paid from the broker or it's paid from the seller. Or no compensation will be offered to the buyer's broker. It has to be spelled out in the very, very beginning. Okay. So those are the two major points that have changed. Now, modification to the listing agreement. So you need to use this if any changes are needed to that existing listing agreement as far as compensation, termination date, price, and terms. Now, so the seller may agree in the beginning um, to offer, say, 2% to the buyer's broker. However, they don't have to. So when they get the offer and the offer is not what they were expecting, or they're netting not quite what they were expecting, they may say, I'm not. And that's totally okay. They may say, I'm not offering compensation with this price point. It's up for negotiation in the contract. So in any event, you would need the modification to listing agreement if um, if the listing agreement says initially like 0, they're not going to give anything, and then it's been like maybe 4 weeks, it's been maybe 6 weeks, the seller's not seeing traffic, the seller may decide, yes, I'll offer some percentage to that buyer's broker. That's when you need this form, the modification to the listing agreement, and you would change it here. Or you could also use it for extending the term. So that's what this is here for. So this is a new form, and it might be temporary, of course. Compensation disclosure statement. Now you're going to want to give this to any buyer, seller, or owner if the existing listing agreement or the existing buyer agreement does not include this statement. So this is anything that was signed prior to the forms being released in Form Simplicity. So I would just say, oh, there's no signature needed. So if I were you, um, it wouldn't hurt to give this compensation disclosure statement to all of your existing clients. Like, it just wouldn't hurt, okay? And all you have to do is document that the copy was delivered via email, text, mail, personal delivery. That's all you have to do. You don't need to get a signature. So why not just send this off and say, um, Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller, this form explains some of the changes. And this could open the conversation. It probably will. The seller may say, well, gee, should I offer it? And then you have to explain the pros and cons of offering compensation to the procuring buyer's broker. Okay, coming soon, the amended retainer agreement. There will be release of more amended listing agreements. Again, none of these forms are set in stone. This is a very fluid situation here. There's things that we're still finding out from the settlement, things that are coming down and perhaps some revisions that are going to be needed. So just keep an eye out. Always, as a rule of thumb, always go into form simplicity when you're getting these forms. That is a helpful thing to do. Now, I'm saying that, and I know the Radius, we have a lot of tech rolled out with our Office app. And so just so you know, the new forms will always be updated in that product. But if you're looking for things like the disclosure statement just to offer, you're not writing the offer in, like if you're not writing offer in the Office app, you do want to go to Form Simplicity and get the latest version of those, okay? And again, the condo writers expect those in October. They keep getting delayed, so we'll see. Not sure why the delay. Oh, and that's it. I just breezed through that. Kiana, do you have any questions? If not, I want to thank you all. I'm glad this was kind of short and sweet so that it can be concise and you can read up on this, watch it later on YouTube. And I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Bye-bye.